Our next guest on the show today is our friend James Bamford, and he wrote the books on the NSA, The Puzzle Palace, Body of Secrets, A Pretext for War, and The Shadow Factory. And A Pretext for War talks about other things besides the NSA, but there's some NSA stuff in there too. And also, it's a really great book about all kinds of stuff and how the neocons light us into war and everything. It's awesome. And did I mention The Shadow Factory? And he's got this one here at the New York Times, Israel's NSA scandal. And just a couple of months back, he had Edward Snowden, The Untold Story, in-depth interview and study of Snowden and his situation and his revelations for Wired magazine, which is all available at wired.com. Welcome back to the show, Jim. How are you doing?
Yeah, great, Scott. Thanks.
Good. Very happy to have you here. And I'm reminded, if I ever knew, I must have forgotten that you actually started off on this course. I must have read this in one of your books at some point, that you actually started off on this course because you were a whistleblower yourself in the U.S. Navy. Can you tell us about that real quick?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I wrote a little bit about that in my Wired article about when I met with Snowden. Yeah, what happened was I was in the Navy for 3 years during the Vietnam War, and I was assigned to a unit in Hawaii that was the Navy's equivalent of the NSA, the Navy's NSA branch, basically. So, like Snowden, I was in the NSA in Hawaii, and most of what I learned there was just had to do with the Vietnam War and so forth. But then when I came back and I was in law school, I was in the reserves, Navy reserves, and then I was sent on a 2-week active duty to a listening post in Puerto Rico. And while on the listening post, one of the people there asked if I wanted to listen to one of the conversations they were hearing on the earphones, since I was just sort of wandering around as 2 weeks after duty there. So I said, sure, but I didn't speak Spanish, which is mostly what they were targeting down there. But he said, don't worry, they're speaking English. So I listened to it, and there were Americans speaking. I didn't really think much of it when I was down there. And then when I got back to law school, I started thinking about, don't you need a warrant for something like that? And I was a student prosecutor in my last year in law school, so we talked about getting warrants and so forth and probable cause and all that. So I thought it was very odd that they didn't have any kind of legal justification for eavesdropping on Americans. And around that time, the church committee was starting. So I let the church committee, I gave them a call and just happened to tell them that what I was doing, what I heard down there. They were very surprised, and they sent a investigator down, and he discovered, that what I was saying was true, and I ended up spending a number of days down in Washington testifying before the committee and executive session.
Wow, that's really something else. A big part of history there, a small footnote in a big part of history, Jim.
That was one of the things that inspired me to write the first book about NSA, The Puzzle Palace. Was, I thought if they were getting away with this, who knows what else they're getting away with, and nobody's ever heard of this agency, and somebody should look into it. So that's why I decided to, after I graduated from law school, to become a writer and start off with The Puzzle Palace.
Mm-hmm. And then I guess lately I've been leaving this out of your bio because it's been a while, but you were a producer for ABC World News Tonight for a long time and got into journalism besides just the NSA books, too. You did a lot of other work. Should mention that from time to time. And you've written a lot of great articles for Rolling Stone, like The Man Who Sold the War and a lot of other things for Wired and other things. I'd like to mention all that stuff. It's good work. All right, so now please talk to us about Unit 8200 and these new refuseniks.
Well, Unit 8200 is something I've known about for a long time because it's the Israeli equivalent of NSA. It's been very secret. Very few people ever hear about it. It doesn't really get any attention. And just to back up a bit, I was in Moscow last summer, and Ed Snowden, when I was interviewing him, I spent 3 days with him in Moscow. Among the things he told me was that the NSA was passing to Unit 8200 unredacted intercepts that it was picking up in the U.S. and around the world. And so that was very shocking, because even England, even friendly countries that are part of the Five Eyes agreement don't get unredacted or intercepts where the names and personal information is deleted. So they were giving that to Israel, which was quite shocking. And then just last week, it turned out that 43 veterans of Unit 8200, some of them still serving in the reserves, decided to basically walk out or quit. They said they weren't going to do this type of activity anymore because it was a violation of basically of the rights of the Palestinians. They accused them of using intercepts that talked about sexual activity, things like that, and then using that as blackmail against the Palestinians, such as their sexual preferences if they happen to be gay, and then use that to blackmail them into becoming workers for Israel, informants for Israel, which they thought was very disgusting, and they decided to quit. I've never seen an intelligence agency anywhere at any time where you have 43 people all of a sudden agree to basically stop and blow the whistle. They had 43
amazing.
Whistleblowers from Unit 8200, and they, like Snowden, they didn't hide their names. They all signed a letter to the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. So it was quite extraordinary. And when you put those two facts together, the fact that the NSA is sending unredacted information from the United States, and that may include a lot of information from Palestinian Americans communicating to their relatives in Palestine or Israel, and then having that all secretly turned over, names and data and everything else, to the Israelis, who then use it to blackmail and intimidate and coerce innocent Palestinians, then it's certainly a scandal.
Mm-hmm. Now, do you know if any of the refuseniks have actually mentioned the NSA Hall in doing this work, or just it's as simple as that? They're using everything that they've got, including, of course, what the NSA is turning over to them. That, as you said, would include even people in the United States, maybe.
Right. They didn't specifically mention NSA, but they didn't eliminate anything. They just said what they said was that there were virtually no controls on any of the information that they took in. There was no oversight, no controls. And the U.S. Back in 2009, in March of 2009, had an agreement with Israel where they would give them all this unredacted information. And the U.S. put a caveat in there saying that the Israelis should abide by U.S. laws and so forth, but there was nothing in there to enforce it. It specifically said this is a non-binding agreement. And as the veterans of Unit 8200 indicated, there was no supervision of any of that. So there was no internal restriction saying, "No, this is American. Don't use it." There weren't any restrictions whatsoever.
Mm-hmm. And then I'm trying to find. Oh, here it is, right here in your New York Times article, Jim. You use the phrase "virtually all forms of communication." Am I understanding you right? You're saying the NSA, and you're referring back to this Guardian story and the Snowden documents.
Right.
That you're telling me they're given the entire haul of their daily vacuuming up of every 1 and 0 in the world. They're turning it over to the Israelis on a daily basis, and then secondarily, it's on the Israelis to not look at what the congressmen are saying to their mistresses, or the judges are saying to the defense contractors that pay them off, or any of these kind of things. They're on their honor to
Palestinian Americans are saying to their relatives.
Yeah.
Back in Palestine or Israel. So no, there are no restrictions. That's what the veterans, the whistleblowers said. Plus the U.S. document itself said it will cover virtually all forms of communications, including but not limited to unevaluated and unminimized transcripts, GIFs, facsimiles, telex, voice, and digital network intelligence, metadata, and content. That's a big word for email. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, virtually everything, a fax, a telex, a telephone call, and it's talking about content and transcripts and so forth. So, and then it said the agency routinely sends this information, this unminimized data to Israel. So, no, it's quite extraordinary because, you know, this is a foreign country, and these are private communications by innocent Americans. Whoever, you know.
I'm more guilty. I'm more
authorization.
I'm more concerned about the guilty ones, Jim. Like you're saying about these poor Palestinians, people with power in America being compromised because it's not just Tom, Dick, and Harry and your local Palestinian neighbors who are having their information turned over, but this wouldn't exclude Congress. It wouldn't exclude high-level officials of the executive branch. It wouldn't exclude federal judges, would it? This would include everything on them too.
There was absolutely nothing in there saying any kind of exclusion. It was everything. I mean, there was no. The words were all forms of communications, unevaluated, unminimized, transcripts, and so forth. So no, there wasn't any restrictions on what kind of information would be sent. So, yeah, it could be anything, and that's very dangerous when you allow a foreign country complete access to private U.S. communications.
Mm-hmm. I think this article, this op-ed piece of yours in the New York Times may have been the New York Times' first mention of this story. They certainly did not cover it when it originally came out, as they usually do with new Snowden stories that appear in other places. You know, they'll have a New York Times write-up that says the Washington Post said today kind of thing. But they sure didn't mention this one until now, it looks like. So, or I don't think they did anyway. I know they didn't at the very beginning. So that's kind of part of our problem is that, you've been reporting about the NSA and different aspects of their relationship with the Israeli government in pretty scandalous terms, I think, for, 7 years now. And that never made the New York Times either. So now here we are 7 years later, and we see that the same kinds of things are still going on.
Well, yeah, and when the New York Times decided not to do a story based on that, when some of these details came out originally in the Guardian, not the whistleblower aspects of it, but the fact that the NSA was sharing the information with Israel. Later on, a couple of days later, I think it was, the ombudsman for the New York Times said that was a mistake. They shouldn't have done that. And that was one of the reasons I wanted to write this, was because it had been overlooked a great deal in the United States, and so I thought that this was a perfect opportunity to re-alert people to the fact that this was going on. And the peg, the really interesting peg is the fact that you have 43 people from the Israeli NSA complaining about the immoral and improper use of this information.
Mm-hmm. All right, and now can you remind us again